You know that feeling when you're watching a show and suddenly a character travels a crazy distance in record time, or forgets to die after being fatally stabbed? So you do the only rational thing and express this frustration in a series of YouTube videos with slightly too loud background music. Or is that just me? What's interesting is that in every video I've made pointing out plot holes and inconsistencies in Game of Thrones, every time without fail, someone will tell me that I shouldn't question everything, or that it's got dragons in it and you're worried about teleportation, or simply that it's fantasy, bro. Oh, right. It's fantasy, bro. So everything goes then?
I think not!
Well, in today's episode of Proving the Haters Wrong, I'm going to explain to you the difference between realism and real-world accuracy, and why we're not crazy for accepting dragons but rejecting teleportation. When we start watching or reading fiction, we enter a sort of contract of imagination, commonly known as suspension of disbelief. We pause our skepticism for the sake of immersion. Now, this contract covers three kinds of realism. First up is hard realism, which has to do with the physics, biology, and mechanics. Like, do dragons exist? Sure, it is known.
It is known.
Does it take time to travel vast distances in this world?
We've been riding for a month, my love.
There we go. Can people in this world survive being stabbed in the gut?
Murdered by a pig.
That's not going to get better.
Nope, clearly not.
It is known.
So you can see how it gets problematic in later seasons when Arya does survive getting stabbed in the gut, and Gendry sprints across the vastness of the north in a single afternoon.
You're the fastest. Go, now!
This is unrealistic not because it contradicts real-world physics, but because it contradicts the physics established by the story itself. As for the existence of dragons, well, they don't actually make a difference here. Then there's soft realism, which refers to character psychology and emotional logic. But really, I hear someone at the back say, emotions are not logical? Well, no. But just like how realism and real-world accuracy aren't the same, emotional logic and logic aren't the same either. The most popular example of soft realism being shattered in Game of Thrones is, of course, Jaime Lannister's sudden U-turn from being a man who deep down cared about other people to someone who
Never really cared much for them, innocent or otherwise.
This change of heart comes after him famously stopping the Mad King from nuking King's Landing with wildfire, turning back to save Brienne at Harrenhal, and defying Cersei to ride up north and fight for the living. While it's important to validate each other's feelings and all that, it doesn't make any sense for him to feel this way. It's wrong. And again, the existence of dragons doesn't change that.
I heard you the first time.
Last, and perhaps the trickiest kind of realism, is the cognitive kind. As social creatures, there's nothing we find more interesting in the universe than ourselves. People love stories about people, whether it's campfire stories, comic strips, or the Bible. Die-hard fans of Game of Thrones might recall how George R.R. Martin likes to quote William Faulkner in that the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. So, even when a protagonist is an animal, or God, we still relate to them on a human level, because they represent values and/or human cognition. Cognitive realism is when fiction mirrors how real human minds work, not just what decisions are made, but how they're made. And when people struggle with competing values, like Jaime choosing between Cersei or the people, and when someone behaves irrationally in ways that makes perfect sense given their perspectives, like Daenerys going crazy from hearing some bells ring. Oh yeah, not quite, huh? Good writing is hard, and Game of Thrones had this, but threw it all out the window when the story needed Daenerys to become the Mad Queen at the end of Season 8. After seeing the enemy surrender, she, for absolutely no reason whatsoever, decides to fly her dragon over King's Landing and fulfill her father's dying wish of burning them all. Not enough build-up, just completely random, contrived, and it felt, you guessed it, unrealistic. And no, just because she's riding a dragon, you get it at this point, don't you? It may sound counterintuitive, but the more real-world accurate a story is in every other way, the easier the fantastical elements are to believe in. Balancing hard, soft, and cognitive realism is not easy, But if done right, it contributes to something that, kind of like sound design, is only really noticed when done poorly. Consistency. Consistency makes or breaks realism. Remember, it's fantasy, bro, so you can create whatever rules you feel like. But you have to follow them. And when you make something happen, you can't very well pretend it didn't happen, can you?
No? Curious.
As much as I like to make an example of Game of Thrones, though, I struggle to think of a better bad example for consistency than House of the Dragon.
I have no wish to rule!
Good morrow, my lords!
Lord Commander Westerling, take your knights to Dragonstone. Be quick and be clean.
Otto Hightower would never have allowed it.
Are you suggesting we put a Malister on a dragon?
It's better than death and defeat.
The lowborn claiming dragons. Was it her idea, Lady Massaria?
But culture vulture, it's just entertainment. Why overthink it? Just enjoy it for what it is.
It's out of the question.
No, that's fair, actually. Not everything needs to be scrutinized for logical consistency. And sometimes you just want to turn your brain off and watch something explode for no better reason than
Family.
It's funny, people sometimes ask me if I'd ever make an every error video for the Fast and the Furious movies, but that would be even more ridiculous than...
Ignition!
Even if these films took themselves seriously once upon a time, they certainly do not anymore. And trying to hold them accountable for that would only go to show that I'm the one missing the point.
Family.
However, with productions that do take themselves seriously, like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, we should totally criticize these infringements. Because if we let them off the hook about something as crucial as consistency, then what bar are we setting? If we swallow anything and everything they pump out, what incentive do we give producers to provide high-quality culture?
It's 17 multicolored dragons of all different shapes and sizes. That's the thing you're all most excited about, right?
You are an ill-made, spiteful little creature, full of envy, lust, and low cunning.
Another common rebuttal I get when criticizing impossible feats of traveling impossibly far at no time at all is, oh, so you want to see every minute a character spends traveling? And well, no, we don't need that. But we do need some reference point that matches up with other concurrent events to feel immersed. Early Game of Thrones did this all the time, most notably episode 2, which is even called The King's Road, because everyone and their dog is out traveling. Take this scene with Jon and Tyrion on the way from Winterfell to Castle Black. Now, on paper, this looks like a duller affair than a Dothraki wedding without at least 3 deaths, but as you'll see, it doesn't take much to accomplish a lot, if you know how to write dialogue.
Why'd you read so much?
Look at me and tell me what you see. What you see is a dwarf. My brother has his sword, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone.
Or take Arya's journey throughout seasons 2 and 3, which is mostly her traveling through the Riverlands. First to Harrenhal, then to the Twins, and the Vale, before finally shooting off to Braavos. Notice how this painstaking quest to get home sees her develop all kinds of new skills and forge new alliances. It's meaningful as f***. This boots-on-the-ground perspective also provides amazing world building and immersion by showing her encounter the small folk of Westeros, which, again, makes the world feel real.
Things were different when Hostatali ruled the Riverlands. Now, with the phrase, raiders come plundering, steal our food, steal our silver. The whole country's gone sour.
This right here is why we love her, because we get to spend time with her. It's precisely because it takes such a long time to get anywhere and how hard she has to fight for every step that we feel such satisfaction when she finally makes it home. Or would have if the show hadn't fallen off a cliff at that point. Which brings us to House of the Dragon.
What do you mean?
House of the Dragon, with its jarring time skips and people teleporting in and out behind enemy lines, covers so much timeline in such a short amount of episodes that we don't get to know the world and its cast intimately enough to... Not that kind of intimate. Okay, let's compare. In both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, a war is brewing and eventually fought between 2 factions we get to follow closely. The difference between how these shows immerse its viewers is how they prioritize. First and foremost, Game of Thrones was shot in real-life locations with lots of scenes taking place out in the country.
Gods, this is country.
And by constantly showing us how frustrating it is to not be able to be in two places at once, we sense the challenges of their situation and the vastness of the world.
It's time for me to go home.
You can't go to Winterfell. It's tomorrow. You'll ride south to the Stormlands. I need you to negotiate with Renly Baratheon.
As for House of the Dragon, very few scenes are actually shot on location, and characters keep popping up back and forth between locations so fast it doesn't provide anywhere near the same sense of time passing, let alone depth in world building as in Game of Thrones. And because most of what happens on screen doesn't actually matter in the end anyway, the Dragon Egg standoff, the war on the Stepstones, Daemon murdering his wife, the locations themselves become forgettable too. Unlike in Game of Thrones, where the geography itself was a major player in the story. Like the fact that a river needed urgent crossing forced Robb into a marriage pact that eventually led to the Red Wedding. But we'll get onto that in a minute. A prime example of eventually failing at this is, of course, when Daenerys travels with her Dothraki and Unsullied armies from Meereen to Dragonstone. A whole new continent, a whole new climate, in a whole new world. Realistically, this would be the perfect breeding ground for trouble. I mean, if the Starks and Lannisters can't get along for a month on the King's Road, imagine the friction that must surely arise between Dothraki, Unsullied, and Ironborn transporting two rape and pillage-based cultures in the same boats for weeks at sea, and then encamped on a small barren island. But no trouble, no infighting, no nothing. Neglecting these natural challenges is why the later seasons of Game of Thrones felt so disappointing, rushed, and unimmersive. And making these exact same mistakes, if not worse, is why House of the Dragon will never come anywhere close to matching even the quality of the worst of Game of Thrones.
This is a truly pathetic show.
Every fictional world has its own physical laws, but it has emotional ones too. And when those are violated, it can be even more jarring than breaking physical laws. Remember Robb Stark in the Red Wedding? Yeah, I thought so. After agreeing to the alliance and marriage pact with the Freys, Robb then spends season 2 falling in love and marrying someone else, which triggers the cunning Tywin to reach out to Walder Frey and orchestrate Robb's downfall at the end of season 3.
The Lannisters send their regards.
But you could trace this even further back to Littlefinger pitting the Lannisters and the Starks against each other in the first place, but these are the events that step by step lead to the Red Wedding over multiple seasons. There's a lot going on here, and over a considerable amount of time, and yet it all makes sense. It feels real. This is called build-up. Perhaps the biggest build-up development in Game of Thrones is Jon's true parentage, a mystery stemming from day one and spanning 6 entire seasons before finally being revealed. The clues are there for us to work it out if we're really paying attention, but the story never focuses on this until the moment comes to finally drop the bomb. And when it does, it feels cathartic, true, and inevitable. With good build-up, the narrative punches hit so much harder. It doesn't always have to span multiple seasons, but just like with good food, the longer we have to wait, the better it tastes.
Good soup.
In House of the Dragon, however, build-up looks a little different. Most tension tends to have a resolution no longer than 2 episodes later, making the narrative dynamic less of a gourmet meal like early Game of Thrones, and more like a truck stop hot dog or something. Another trend in recent years is to slim down seasons from 10 to 8 episodes. Character introductions, developments, and exits now happen in such a tight time frame we barely get to spend any time with them. This, in turn, inevitably leads to what I call the empathy gap, which is just a fancy term for a lack of emotional stakes. Stakes are super important. It's why we care about what's happening in a story. And when the stakes are solid, we're more likely to forgive slight inconsistencies. However, if inconsistencies are all we know of a story, looking at you, House of the Dragon, its characters and the world they inhabit start to feel incredibly hollow and unrelatable.
What do you mean?
When was the last time you forgave a major plot hole because the overall story was just that captivating? It's okay, we all do it. Here's one of mine.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
Guys, let me introduce you to Ugluk.
What is it?
The Uruk-hai from The Lord of the Rings, who famously used the word menu, implying the existence of restaurants in Mordor, indirectly implying a supply chain and economy with delivery personnel and the Valar knows what else. But how is this not a problem at all? Shouldn't this slip of the typewriter ruin the immersion in Peter Jackson's otherwise fabulous interpretation of Middle-earth? No, because the overall world building and narrative is so super solid that this one passing comment becomes relatively insignificant. Contrast this to The Rings of Power, where the writers have gone on nothing short of a crusade to break the lore and undo the magic of Middle-earth, to the point of orcs wanting to create a safe place for their frickin' children to grow up in. Yes, children. The orcs are no longer the tortured and corrupted elves we know and love, but are now born into loving f***ing families. Idiots. Proper emotional stakes, on the other hand, combined with good build-up, makes the emotional investment pay off. That's why crying over Catelyn, Robb, and his wife at the Red Wedding comes a lot more naturally than, say, crying over Laena Velaryon. Who? So, when something feels off about a story, we default to calling it unrealistic. But what we're actually detecting is inconsistency, either with the established rules of the world or with our understanding of human behavior. Arya and the Hound spending 1.5 seasons traveling around the Riverlands, only to then see the Unsullied teleport from coast to coast from one scene to the next, doesn't just betray the world's established geography, but the hard-earned trust built with the audience over years. And no,
but there are dragons,
isn't a valid counter-argument, because while dragons enable its riders to fly and burn them all, they don't change how long it takes to walk. And look, I get it. Sometimes we just want to enjoy the story without thinking too hard. But your brain is constantly running background diagnostics whether you like it or not. That doesn't make you a nitpicker, it makes you a thinking human being. So, the next time you see someone pointing out plot holes and continuity errors, remember that the issue isn't about documenting reality. It's about getting some damned RESPECT for your intelligence and emotional investment. About truth. Because remember, one of the beautiful things about storytelling is that with the right mix of build-up, stakes, and immersion, even the most unreal moments can ring more true than reality itself. Thanks for watching.